The Isle of Man at the end of a week which has seen the Manx general election. And a little later on in the programme tonight, we'll be bringing you a full results and analysis service. Now, there are many who say the Manx have got their politics just about right. There are no real party politics here in the Isle of Man. The date of the general election is never in any doubt, as it has been in recent months in the UK. It's held here every 5 years on the dot. But perhaps more interestingly, the way of voting a new government in is very different. Here it's done by a system of proportional representation. Terry Kringle has been looking at the single transferable vote.
Elections in the Isle of Man are different in lots of ways, but the most fundamental difference is in the way people cast their votes. They don't just put an X alongside the name of the candidate they favour, they have to do it by numbers. The single transferable vote was introduced in the Isle of Man for the 1986 general election. The ballot papers are no different from those used in the first-past-the-post system, but you forget X. STV requires that you consider the merits of all the candidates in your constituency and then mark them all in order of preference, first, second, third, and so on. Unless, of course, you wish to vote for only one person, that's known as plump voting. Then you just put number 1 by the name of your choice. It's a more complex business than using an X, and many voters are confused by it. As a result, in 1986 there were a lot of spoiled papers, spoiled both by accident and design. But voting is nothing like as complicated as counting the votes. This is conducted by the returning officers, and in a constituency like Jeff Caron's, Russian, with 3 seats and 8 candidates, it's more difficult than most.
We've got to employ more people to operate the count, and most of the returning officers do employ an accountant as the chief counter to assist in relation to calculations of values and decisions as to whether we're transferring surpluses or excluding from the bottom.
Some of the fiercest opposition to STV is among members of local authorities in the island. It applies in council elections as well, and it was imposed upon them by the Manx government. But some, like Douglas Town Councillor David Christian, would throw it out tomorrow.
There's very strong political opposition to the single transferable vote system, and I think the reason for that is because the majority of people on the Isle of Man are totally anti-STV. They don't appreciate it, they don't understand it, and obviously the politicians of the Isle of Man have to represent the views of the people that we represent.
There was a spirited political struggle over the idea of introducing STV. The man mainly responsible for steering it through against vigorous opposition was Victor Neal, who was Speaker of the House of Keys before he retired from politics just before this election. And he can't understand how anyone can't understand it.
It's a very simple system, and anybody thinks that it's complicated must be pretty thick. All they've got to do is like fill in a competition in a newspaper. I've put people in order of preference, remembering they only have one vote, and that is their number 1 preference. But if their number 1 is eliminated, their chance of electing somebody is not lost, because the vote is transferred to their second choice.
This argument is far from over. It'll probably still be going on when we get to the next election in November 1996. But STV appears to be here to stay. And for once, the Isle of Man will be able to say, what we do today, Britain does tomorrow. Or sometime soon, anyway.
But one area where the British say the Manx are lagging is the question of the law and homosexuality. It's the nearest thing there's been to an issue in this election, and feelings are running high. The British have threatened to enforce a change of law to make homosexual acts legal on the island if the Manx won't change the law themselves. But it's a threat that cuts little ice in some quarters. Edgar Quine.
The Manx people do not see the decriminalisation of buggery as a legitimate right. We see it as an abominable act, which is what it is. And secondly, there is very real concern that if it were to be decriminalised, it would result in the bringing of this activity out into the open. It would result in more of this activity, and that would be contrary to the interests of the people of this island.
Hazel Hannon has made no secret of her support for a change in the law during canvassing in her Peel constituency. And her feelings about those who oppose a change are as strong as their feelings about homosexuals.
They feel it's very good hammering people down and keeping people down. We're talking about ordinary human beings. We're talking about people who can't choose their sexuality. And yet we have people in the house, we have people, Christians, outside the house, who are absolutely abhorrent in their objection to these people. And I feel very much more strongly to the people that object in a strong way than I do to any homosexual.
Traditionally, the Isle of Man economy has been heavily dependent on tourism. And although the finance sector has taken on a more dominant role, tourism is nonetheless still important. The last 5 years have seen a major change in the type of visitor the Isle of Man sets out to attract. And whilst Chief Executive of the Department of Tourism, Terry Toohey, admits there have been mistakes, on the whole he's happy with the present position.
Well, the achievements have been that the industry has become leaner and fitter and has geared itself up more for the competition, which of course is pretty ferocious nowadays compared to what it used to be maybe a generation ago.
But there's been a dissatisfaction on the part of hoteliers about the role the Department of Tourism has played. Whilst the industry has been contracting, Chris Robertshaw of the British Hotel, Restaurant and Caterers Association says the civil servants have been more concerned with looking after themselves.
The tourist department has really been pursuing an attitude where its main concern has been its self-perpetuation rather than a redevelopment of the industry at a crucial time.
But whatever the arguments of the past may be, at least all sides agree on the road ahead. And the island's tourist industry is now ready to make capital from the sometimes painful cuts it's undergone over the past 5 years.
The tourist industry on the Isle of Man is now fitter and healthier than it's ever been in the last decade, and certainly is ready to grasp any development or any route that the world industry is going to pursue or reach over the next 5 years.
A lot of hopes are centred around the appearance of the Sea Cat on Irish sea routes from next April. And many see that as the key to a resurgence in the number of day trippers coming to the Isle of Man. Despite being faced with making up numerous local authorities and a national government from a population of only around 70,000, the Manx have produced many capable politicians over the years. We've asked Brigadier Norman Butler, who at this election has retired from his Ramsey constituency, to look at the elder statesman of Manx politics.
The dominant figure in Manx politics since the war has been Sir Charles Kirusha. He first stood for the Keys in 1943 and has served continuously since 1945. Last year, he took on the new role of President of Tynwald and admits to feeling a little left out of the current election fever.
Frankly, it feels very strange indeed. There's always the reaction, I should be in there participating. And then you realise that from the ringside, you get a better view of the game. And it does enable me to appreciate the fact that for all those years, I received the unstinted support of my constituency. And indeed, also how fortunate I am to be in a position now where I can use the experience of those years, hopefully to the advantage of the island.
This election